forward to it. Well, how did you guys start this? So what was the year? You said 2000.
Okay, so Glenn has asked a question, how did this group get started? And I'm going to answer that. So in 2003, I think it was maybe spring or maybe winter, RV Robinson started this group. She was a member of the board of the Claremont Forum in its old location. And she had the kind of background you have. She was a motivator.
Yeah, I know her.
Motivating speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she started the storytelling group, and we met. Well, Chris went a couple of times, and I didn't. Chris had participated in the old Claremont storytelling group that was run by Dorothy Chase at the Folk Music Center. And Dorothy Chase ran that group for probably 10, 12 years at least. But when she died, there was nothing in Claremont for maybe 5, 6 years. And then Arvie started it, meeting at the Claremont Forum. And the way she organized it was everybody who came had to contribute $3 to pay for the rental of the room. And Chris told me about it. And I went, and I guess it must have started in winter, because I went a couple of times in spring, and it was in June that June was a busy year. I was teaching, and grades are due, and so I didn't go, and Chris didn't go, and only 2 other people showed besides RV Robinson, and that's 3 plus 3 plus 3. That's only $9, and the rental was $15. And RV said, "I quit.
Oh,
There's just not enough interest here. I'm not going to bankroll this thing." And she handed the key to one of the 2 people who was there. "If you want to keep this group going, it's on you." And so, yeah. And so we got a call, and the 2 people are Patricia Snow, who took over the leadership. She was the leader of the group. And Sarah Truitt, she's no longer part of the group, but she was very active. You probably remember Sarah.
Sure.
And she was a great storyteller. She told Jewish folktales mostly.
So where does she live?
And
I saw her recently.
Claremont.
Okay, well, that's why I saw her.
Yeah, she lives in Claremont.
Yeah, she's local, but she just gave up playing storytelling.
Well, she got into writing plays.
Oh, okay.
And being an author rather than delivering, telling stories. She got more into the written word rather than the spoken word. And so we may have another. Yes. Are you here for storytelling?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
All right, come on in. We'll get a chair for you. They're in the restroom if you want to get one.
I think the secret chairs are.
Okay, so anyway, they called us and said, "Are you interested?" And Chris and I said, yeah, we'll help. And so under Patricia Snow's leadership, the group was able to survive. And then Nick started coming, and Leslie Perry started coming, both from Pasadena, to give us support. And we produced our first celebration in 2003, and that was the first time I ever told to a paying audience. And
You got bit by the bug too, right?
yeah. I enjoyed it. And anyway, so then in 2007, I took over leadership. Patricia had been training me for several years. She was really good about delegating and getting other people involved. I'm not so great at that.
Right.
Yeah, you do it all.
I know.
She'd bring a little teapot and plug it in.
Yeah. Anyway, so, and then we started getting professional storytellers coming, Karen Ray Kraut and Angela Lloyd, and that gave us more attractiveness for other people to join. And as you know, we were meeting here with 15, 20 people.
That's what I was telling you. Yeah, when I joined, So vibrant.
Yeah.
Every.
Well, COVID really hurt.
COVID hurt.
COVID hurt a lot, and it was hard on all the states. And we're just now, it's been less than a year we've gone back to live meetings. Why don't you introduce yourself? We all introduced ourselves.
Okay, my name's Maynard. The month of May with the nerd at the end.
And where do you live?
I'm actually up in the mountains. Anyway, hello. Hi.
Where in the mountains?
Between Arrowhead and Big Bear.
Oh, wow, you had a drive.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Welcome. How did you find?
Yeah.
How'd you find out about this meeting?
Well, I just wanted to find out if there were any storytellers in the vicinity of the Inland Empire and stuff.
Mhm.
So this group came up and it's like, I like the settings you guys have. This and then that instrument.
Yeah.
Place. So that's a really cool kind of setting to the wood floors and everything. It's
Yeah.
nice. No, there's something about it. It's like it should feel good. Have that kind of a setting. But,
Yeah. Okay, so welcome, Maynard.
Oh, thanks.
And your last name?
Ms. Smith.
Smith. Okay. So I was just giving, Glenn asked for the history of this group, and you kind of got in on the end of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I think what I'm going to do, we have one storyteller in the Zoom group. This is a hybrid meeting. That's why I have the computer here. And we are recording. So I'm going to take the spotlight off of me and put it on Walter. Are you okay to go first?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the chair here. Or put the computer on Walter. And take it away, Walt.
Okay. I'm not 100% sure this qualifies as a story exactly. I kind of got the idea from what I used to do with my students. I, as an exercise, told them to get a personal experience. It was kind of minor, but sort of interesting. And then using their imagination to flesh it out into a real story. So I was thinking of this incident that happened a few years ago, and I decided to give myself my own medicine, so to speak, by making it into a story. So I call it The Right Thing. It was a long, hot summer in Southern California. So my wife and I planned a little trip up the coast on Highway 101, where we could cool off a little bit and have a little adventure. We stopped in this unique little town called Solvang. About 100 years ago, it had been a community of Danish immigrants. And over time, it had transformed itself into a tourist destination by building a downtown lined with shops that were meant to resemble a European village. It's a pleasant place. It's packed with tourists, mostly families with young children and a lot of retired couples. It has a safe, protected feel to it, kind of like being at Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm. And it's full of shops, selling all the things that you might find in a tourist trap, jewelry, teacups, silver, tableware, paintings, framed photographs, miniature ceramic figures, and of course, lots of places to eat. Restaurants, coffee shops, candy shops, bakeries. It's the kind of place that's perfect for an enthusiastic wife and their very patient husbands. To leisurely stroll the sidewalks, window shopping, and occasionally browsing the merchandise in the shops. Well, by late afternoon, we had had enough, and we headed for our car, which we had left parked on a little slab of weedy asphalt that served as a parking lot for a very small corner bakery shop at the edge of town. We got a couple of fresh baked pastries and sat out on the patio to enjoy them. As we ate, I noticed a man in the lot leaning against a car, waiting. He didn't have the tourist look about him. He was wearing heavy boots and dirty jeans. He nervously blew clouds of smoke from a cigarette. He didn't look like a guy on vacation. He looked like a guy that had just finished a hard day's work. A woman appeared from around the corner and headed straight for that car, but she stopped abruptly as soon as she laid eyes on him. "What are you doing here?" she said, keeping her distance. "I was in the neighborhood." He had a loud and rather overly familiar manner about him. "Well, you can leave just now," she said. Well, they bantered back and forth for some time as we ate our pastries. They argued, and as they argued, she inched toward the car with the key in her hand, sort of aiming it toward the lock. Then all at once she stepped forward, turned the key, opened up the door, but quickly the man opened up the passenger door and plopped himself right in the front seat. And then he said in a loud voice, "Give me a ride home." She just stood there staring at him as if trying to figure out what her next move would be. "Come on, take me home," he said. She remained motionless, hesitating. Then she ordered him to leave the car in a voice that betrayed exasperation and maybe a little fear. But he calmly refused. I wondered, am I about to witness a crime? Attempted kidnapping? Well, we finished off our pastries and we were ready to leave, but this parking lot drama was between us and our car. So we stopped and we watched. I wasn't sure what to do. Should we pass by them and get in our car and just drive away? Should we turn around and leave and go back up the sidewalk and then come back later for our car when it was all over? Should we stay and be witnesses to whatever might happen? Maybe we'd have to be witnesses for the police to describe what was going on. I made note of the license number. But was she really in danger? I suspected she might be, but I wasn't sure. They obviously knew each other. Maybe they were husband and wife, or maybe more likely ex-husband and wife. He didn't threaten her. He didn't seem angry or upset. But his brazenness was intimidating to me and her. I thought, if he's the kind of guy that would fling open someone's door and plop himself uninvited in a car and then loudly order to be driven home, what else might he do? This seemed like the kind of guy not likely to follow the rules of polite society. Now, she could just walk away if she chose, but she didn't. She could plainly see us standing there. She could have asked for help, but she didn't. Yet there was a sense of danger that hung in the air. She was visibly distressed, maybe fearful. I did briefly imagine that I had a duty to intervene on her behalf, maybe shouting out something like, "Hey, leave her alone. Can't you see? She doesn't want you to give you a ride home." But I didn't have the nerve. I considered calling the police. But then what would I tell them? There's a man here asking a woman, maybe his wife, to give him a ride home, and she doesn't want to do it. I imagined that wouldn't sound much like an emergency. I wasn't sure that I wanted to get involved. And I remembered hearing how police dread being called into domestic disputes, even more than armed robberies, because of the extreme volatility and unpredictability that they may encounter. Anything can and does happen when passions run high and tempers are high. Who knows what jealousy or resentment or frustration or hatred may have accumulated in the days or weeks or years, and this may be pinned up inside of them. Any outsider attempting to interfere could ignite something explosive. This seemed like just that kind of situation. I used these thoughts to excuse myself for my lack of courage. So I didn't intervene, but I didn't leave either. I was strangely transfixed by this spectacle, which was both riveting and perplexing. Well, at long last, the woman relented. She opened up the door and stepped in where she started to step in, but she paused for a moment and looked directly at me. And with considerable bitterness, she said, "Thanks a lot for your help." Then she got in the car, started it up, and disappeared down the road with her mysterious passenger. I immediately felt concern for her safety, and a powerful sense of guilt shot through me for having just stood there and done nothing. Her scolding had stunned me. But I excused myself again by thinking, well, she never asked for help. She could have walked away, and clearly he was no stranger. But for the rest of the trip, conflicting thoughts and emotions intruded on my vacation. I mentally both accused myself and argued in my defense. I kept wondering, did I do the right thing? I'm still not sure.
I want to know what happened.
Thank you, Walter.
Great, Walter.
Never seen it before.
Yeah, right.
And neither was-
Yeah.
Okay. Change the spotlight to here. Barbara, you want to go next or later?
Good. You can go.
Okay.
I don't have to record myself. Where am I supposed to stay?
You stand there in the middle. I'll put this right here. Yeah, and try to position yourself so you're showing. That
In
looks
the
good.
middle?
Yeah, in the middle. Okay.
So I first heard this story in Los Angeles at my very first storytelling event. And it was like 30 years ago. And it was Joe Hayes that told the story. And I've never been able to do it as well as he did, but I was enthralled. This story comes from the old country. And it, some people say it happened, they know for sure. Some people have long stories about it. I don't know, but it stays with you. There was a pretty young girl born in a little village, and she was so cute. And every year she got cuter. The problem is, she knew she was cute. And for every year she got cuter, she also got haughtier. So by the time she was a young lady, she didn't pay any attention to the men in her town. They weren't good enough for her. Didn't even look at them. She said, when I get married, I'm going to marry the handsomest man in the whole world. Cuando yo me case, voy a casarme con el hombre más guapísimo del mundo. Well, one day into town came the man that might meet her qualities. Oh, he could ride like a Comanche. He was a son of a rich rancher. He was a ranchero. And he could sing and he could play the guitar. And he was so wild that if his horse got very tame, he'd give the horse away and go out and get himself another wild. So she thought, this may be the man for me. And she knew how to do the wiles to get him. If he walked by her on a pathway and spoke to her, she'd just turn her head. When he came to her house to play the guitar and to sing, she didn't even go to the window to look out. Oh, and the gifts, the luxurious gifts, she rejected them all. It worked. He said, that Maria, that haughty Maria, I'm going to get that girl to marry me. And pretty soon, they were engaged, and pretty soon they were married, and all seemed good. They had 2 kids. But then after a while, he went back to his wild ways of being out on the prairie. He'd be gone for months at a time. When he came in town, he'd talk to his kids, but he never really talked with Maria. And it hurt. It really hurt. One day she was walking along with her kids, and she had overheard somebody saying they think he's going to set his marriage aside to her. so that he could marry somebody of his own wealthy class. Well, walking with her kids, he came riding into town in this fancy little coach and horse, and beside him on the wagon seat, there was this elegantly dressed woman. He stopped the horse, talked to his son, talked to his daughter, didn't even look at Maria. And then, hi-ya, off he went. Oh, she was so mad. She was so mad. And it's sad to say, but she turned that anger toward her children. She grabbed their little hands. She ran to the river and she threw them into the river. And as their little head bobbed under the water, that's when she realized what she had done. She went running down the path, chasing them. Mis hijos, ¿dónde están mis hijos? And she ran and ran and ran until she just fell down and lay still. Nobody in town knew what had happened until the next morning when a traveler came and said that there was this beautiful woman lying dead on the path by the river down there. And so they went down and they wrapped her in white and they laid her to rest right there where she had fallen. So that night, the wind came up and everybody noticed how loud the wind was, and then they listened really closely. And was it the wind? Or was it, mis hijos, ¿dónde están? My children, where are you? Somebody said they saw white figures moving about, calling for her children. Well, that's when they stopped calling her Maria and started calling her La Llorona, the crying woman. So all the parents in town said, don't you stay out after dark, because La Llorona may be looking for you and think you're her child. Well, everybody agreed to that. And it was said year after year the same way. But I have a friend who had an uncle who said that when he was a kid, there was a guy in town, another kid, that said, come on, I don't believe in that old La Llorona stuff. Let's stay out all night. Nobody did it. But that guy, having challenged everybody, he had to stay out. So there he was, sitting by the river. The wind came up, sure enough. Then he saw something white moving through the bushes. It got closer and he heard, mis hijos, ¿dónde están? My children, where are you? She got closer and closer, and then she looked at him and said, mijo. She reached out, she touched his shoulders. Finally, he jerked awake and ran out of there and ran home and went into the house. La Llorona, La Llorona. His mother said, what were you doing out so late? Don't give me that La Llorona. Take off that shirt, it's dirty. Get in your pajamas and go to bed. Well, she washed that shirt, and that shirt never did complete. It had marks of her fingers on the shoulders. So in that village, whenever kids were staying out late, she'd take that shirt and she'd hang it out the window just to warn all the kids, you better go in, La Llorona. Maybe. That's the story, La Llorona.
Thank you, Barbara. That was great.
Thank you.
So you're going to be telling that in a school?
3rd grade up. And then when I asked them, have you ever heard it before? And many have.
Yeah.
It said, I was told when I was 5 or 6, but if I did that in the schools, that wouldn't be.
Are you fluent in Spanish?
I wish I were. Oh,
Yeah, you did a good job.
Oh.
Yeah, I heard Antonio Sacre tell that story, and of course he's fluent in Spanish. It's a great story. Okay, Nick, you want to be next?
Sure. And I want to explain why I'm telling this story now, because it has to do with an anniversary. One of the most famous American rock bands is celebrating the 50th anniversary of one of their most famous albums. The album is titled Wake of the Flood. It came out 50 years ago this week, and it was a revised version of an already existing rock group called the Grateful Dead. But none of the articles and none of the special radio broadcasts about this have mentioned where their name came from. And the name of that group came from a traditional type of story. And in fact, I happen to have a collection of some of those stories put together. And people have asked me, well, what does that have to do with the band? And I said, nothing. But one of the stories from this particular collection is one that I'm going to share with you tonight. It's a story from long ago in France. And once in France, there was a young man, Jean. He was referred to as Jean de Calais because he was from a merchant family, and he was supposed to be out working with his father's and family's merchant ships. But his father didn't quite trust him as a trader because, yes, he understood how to make money, but somehow he managed to always spend the money before he got home. Not wasting it. He always had a really good reason for spending it, but somehow when he went out, he would be rich halfway through the trip and not by the time he came home. Now, his mother was in favor of giving him yet another chance to prove himself because he was always doing good things with the money. He always had an amazing excuse for how he had spent the money before he got home. And she couldn't see that there was anything wrong with what he was doing. He just wasn't growing the wealth of the family. And so it was that he was given one more chance to make a trading trip. And this time, he spent time making the best trades. And by the time he was ready to come home, his last stop on the trading trip, by then he had achieved a great amount of wealth and he'd almost finished trading all of the things he'd taken out and was ready to look for things to take back home. And walking into the town, which was of course against his father's suggestion because he knew that every time Jean walked into town, something would happen. Jean walked into town and there he saw what looked like a dead body on top of a dung heap and people walking past it and cursing and spitting. Well, he thought, that's not right. What's going on here? And he asked one of the passersby and they said, that man there died owing everyone money. And the tradition in our town is you can't be buried until your debts are paid. And he owed us so much that this is where we're displaying him. Well, what about his family? Can't they pay you? He had none that will admit it. Well, Jean couldn't let this just go on, and he couldn't see what to do, but all right, how much money did he owe? And it turned out that whether all the debts were real or not, they came to approximately what he had in the pocket that he'd been planning to use to purchase things in the town for this next stage of the trading. And so it was that, as his father had feared, he spent all of the profits from the trip. But he saw to it that the man was taken off the dung heap and buried properly. And the local priest was willing to do it now that the traditions were satisfied and he was no longer going to face the ire of the townsfolk. Well, Jean went home and he explained again what had happened, and his mother nodded and his father pounded his forehead with his fist. And so it was that again, he didn't go out trading for a while. But once again, the mother said, give him another chance. He did a good deed, even if he didn't get money for it. All right, all right. And so this time, to make sure that Jean did what was right, he was sent out with one of his friends from Spain, Don Juan, to go with Jean on this trip to see that Jean didn't do anything foolish with the money. And so they went out. This time they sailed all the way around the coast of Spain and into the Mediterranean on the best trading ship in Jean's father's fleet. And there they made wonderful trades. They were buying and selling spices and different fabrics and various other things and making money at every stop. And then, as they were in one of the little ports, at the very south of Sicily. Jean heard a voice coming from a nearby ship through one of the portholes. Help us! It was the sound of a woman's voice. Please help us! And Jean, being curious, casually got off the ship and went down the docks to near where the other ship was. And in one of the portholes was a beautiful face, a woman who cried out, help us, we're being held prisoners, we were being kidnapped. You might be able to buy us from these pirates, but please help us. My maid and I need your help. Well, he thought about it and said, I'll try. So he went to the captain of the ship and said, I've heard that you have a couple of women that you've acquired that you were planning to sell elsewhere, but I could save you the trip if you sell them to me. And so they bargained, and sure enough, for an exceptional sum of money, he was able to acquire the beautiful woman and her assistant, her servant. And as it happened, Don Juan was looking at the transaction himself and thinking, wow, she is wondrous and beautiful. Now, as it happened, Jean de Calais and the one who had been calling out spoke, and he learned from her that she was actually from a noble family and that her servant was actually well bred as well, well enough bred that she joked that Isabella could be your cousin and you'd be well off. But it was the first one that Jean was interested in, and she seemed interested in him. And in fact, by the time they got back to the port where Jean's father's fleet was, they were to be married. Now, Jean's mother was delighted by this news. Jean's father was wondering where the money had gone this time, but at least he brought back a bride and the bride's servant. And he couldn't quite be angry at this, but he was still not willing to let them go out on another trading ship until Don Juan said, no. He did a wonderful thing. He rescued this beautiful woman. Let us at least sail back to where her family is, and perhaps we can make money on that trip. And Jean and Don Juan and his bride and his servant went off on one of the trading vessels, this time to go back to her home port. Now, as it happened, Don Juan had been thinking about this. And as it happened, along the way, you might have weather that's a little bit stormy. You might have wind and rain. You might have a merchant's son who slips overboard with perhaps the nudge of an elbow. And so it was that by the time they got to the port, Jean de Calais was not on board the ship, and no one knew where he had gone. Well, the bride and the servant were terribly upset. Don Juan said, well, if he never reappears, I would be willing to become your new husband.
Oh.
She said, no, I must mourn for my lost husband. And so Don Juan was patient, at least outwardly. Now Jean, unlike many sailors of that time, at least knew how to swim. And he was able to swim to a small island, not along the trade routes, but at least it was a small island. And there was enough food there where he could sustain himself, barely. And so he waited and waited for another ship to come by that he could signal to. None did. for it was not on the trade routes. And he ate fish and seafood of different kinds, anything he could find on the little island. And he waited and waited and waited. And some say it was as long as 7 years before anyone found him. And it was not a passing ship. It was a ghost. Now you would think that in the middle of nowhere on a small island, where would you find a ghost? Apparently the problem was that it had taken the ghost that long to find Jean. For it was the spirit of the man whose body he had buried, who he rescued from the dung heap. And the ghost said, I am sorry you have been here for so long. Time apparently passes differently for you. But I can get you to a place of safety. And Jean said, please just take me to my wife. Ah, said the spirit, you know that 7 years have passed in your world and your wife is about to marry your friend Don Juan because you obviously are dead, having been gone for 7 years. And he said, please take me to my wife. And so it was that the spirit said, of course, if this is your wish. I would say taking you outside her father's dwelling, because that's where she is at the moment, and you need to be perhaps refreshed and cleaned up a bit. Because even though he'd had food and water for 7 years, he hadn't had a shave or a haircut, and he was still wearing the same shirt. It's hard to find a laundry on a deserted island. And so it was that he found himself in the edges of the town where his bride's father lived. And he quickly found ways to get work, to make himself more presentable. But finally he said, I must speak to the father of my bride because I don't want her marrying my friend. He went, he became a woodcutter quickly and began selling wood everywhere and used that as an excuse to get closer and closer to the home. And finally, he used an excuse, but wait, there she was. She was looking out the window. And he pulled out the handkerchief that she had given him. And she saw. And she told her servant, Isabel, Jean de Calais is out there. He looks terrible, but he's out there. And so Isabel went out and she said, we have need of wood inside this house. Please come in and do be prepared to wash up a bit, because she noticed that he was not in the best of condition. And she helped cut his hair and shave him and let him bathe himself. And as Don Juan presented the bride's father with one more reason why she should be given to him, in walked Isabel and in walked Jean de Calais. And Don Juan's heart practically stopped in his chest. And he said, goodbye. And he quickly ran out the door. Well, at that point, everyone began to figure out that he'd had something to do with whatever had happened to Jean. And so they had Jean tell in his own words how he had somehow fallen overboard from the ship with what felt like a push of some kind. And how he had spent the time on a deserted island. And how the ghost of someone who needed help had brought him back to his beloved bride. And so it was that the ghost of a dead man repaid that enormous debt for the money that Jean had given. And Jean and his bride were reunited. They and Isabel went back to Calais, and Isabel eventually married well in addition. But Jean's father never again refused him the opportunity to go trading. Because even if he doesn't come back rich, he comes back with something.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. So what's the tie into the Grateful Dead?
Yeah, right.
For whatever reason, they chose the name, the Grateful Dead, which is a folktale type. And if you look at the artwork on their early albums, all of them had some kind of death motif hidden in the artwork.
So this ghost was a Grateful Dead that repaid.
That's what the type of story usually is that a spirit or a dead person does something good for someone that has helped them either in life or after their death.
Amazing. Well, thank you.
And Jerry Garcia was enough of a folklorist that he probably chose that without explaining it to the rest of the band.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a story tonight, Jane? All right. Someone who did artwork.
Wow.
Do you know which album?
I made a website called.
Oh, wow.
Maynard, did you bring the story or did you just come to listen?
Well, I used to work at Disneyland. I tell stories there.
You don't have to tell a story, but if you have one, we'd love to hear it.
Well,
Let's do it.
okay. That's all right. Let's. Yeah.
You're in a safe space.
Yes.
Yes, it's a very nice place. For those of you who are at home, it's a very nice place. All right. Well, okay. So just imagine yourself at the park in Anaheim, and well, let's see. There's the tiki room. Okay. Well, the tiki room outside there's the waiting area, but then there's also a fence, kind of short fence that goes along, and then there's some plants inside it, tree, that type of thing. Well, but then you see, oh, well, there must be lots of kids here because there are these empty strollers. But then my twin brother, he would point out, he used to work there, and he said, "Oh no. Yeah, this is the mention of the invisible babies you have here." And of course, they love to chew on the magic bobo tree, and that's why the boss put up this titanium fence to keep them out. But ever since we bought National Geographic, there was something that happened. The invisible babies somehow they got access to the archives, and there was this one film that they would watch over and over again. And of course, it had to do with river turtles, right? Because the river turtles, one will climb on top of another one like this, and so when they had enough of them together, then that's what they would do. They would climb one on top of another, one of the invisible babies on top of the other, and then finally the top one jumps inside into the planter, and then all the bushes go like this, and then slap. My twin brother would just describe how this happened. He just slap against the tree, and then there would be this branch. It looked like it was just trimmed off, but no. He says, that's really invisible baby. It's very sharp, and it's like very flat. Even a saw can't be that precise. And then, well, what happened was on that particular day, as he described it to me, was that there was a formation of about 12 older ladies who had their electric wheelchairs, and they had it in a formation kind of like the Blue Angels, like the jets overhead, and they were going Dole Whip, we're going to get some Dole Whip, and they kind of, so that was all fine and dandy. But then when the branch came down, it just so happened to come at that point. So they got very upset because, oh, my Dole Whip is over here, we can't get it. And they were kind of upset about that, and they were talking about, oh, let's get the FBI, let's get a helicopter, let's get some type of equipment in here to get that branch out of here so we can get our goal. Well, as they were discussing all this, then the invisible babies, of course, they love to magic bubble tree, and this was part of their plan. Was this big branch comes down, at least they could have some of the taste. So they jumped and they went and they attacked the branch, and so that it was all flipping around. The thing was up and down, and it was like the little twigs and the little leaves and all of that just up, and it's like, and all of a sudden it disappeared. And then all the ladies are going, "Oh, it is magic!" And my twin brother says, "Oh, no. I'm so sorry, ladies, but this is actually the invisible babies had lunch." And they said, "Oh, really?" They all had canes. It's like, it was kind of like kind of in sync. They all pointed at the twin brother. It's like all 12 of them. Oh, what does this mean? So you notice that they took the speed dial, the thing that causes the speed of the machines to go faster. And she turned all the way up. They all look, and they kind of put down their little reading glasses. They had a little squints. And it seemed like they were like, I don't know, almost like they were copies of one another, but they were all different, but they just all this same mindset. And they were upset because he said what he said. They didn't want to have their happiness interrupted. And they thought that, oh, you're saying that they were invisible babies. No. This needs to be justified. So they started to roll, and he said, "Oh, what's this?" And he starts walking, and they're following him and following him. And so he's just, he's just running along. And then he looks over to the Jungle Cruise, okay? And there's the boats there. And he's thinking to himself, "Boy, I remember back when I was a kid, and I watched those cowboy movies. And then in the cowboy movies, and then to get rid of the hound dogs, they jump in the water and they go, and then it's like, and then that's the method. Okay, so he was thinking that. But then he remembered, wait a minute, no. He glanced over, and he could tell the little peepers of the crocodiles underwater, kind of like, just water like this. And he knew from experience that this was not a good idea, because these crocodiles, they have a jealousy over people, because people, not so much the little ones, but the big ones. The ones that have the big feet, the ones that have the big shoes. Because the crocodiles, they would like to have shoes, but there's no shoes to be had because there's no shoes stored underwater. What do you do? So they get angry at the people with the big feet. And it just so happens that my twin brother has feet like mine. As you can see, they're gigantic. It's good for when the wind blows, but so anyway. So we decided not to do that because he might get his costume all torn up by the teeth and stuff. He might get in trouble. So anyway, he decided to keep running. So he's running. And he says, "Oh, I know, it's Jungle Cruise." So we get in there in the water, and he's pushing the boats aside, and the people are inside the boats. And the one guy says, "Hey, you buddy, you shouldn't be in the water there." And so he took his ID from his work, and he's "I'm an official, okay?" And he's, "Oh, okay." So he's going in the water, and and then he hears outside, there's Jesus in the distance. Where's that guy? Where's that guy? And kind of ruckus. So he knew he was kind of in trouble. So he comes up, and then there's this big pile of doubloons, right? And so he says, it was a hot day. He said, "Oh, I know. Okay. So he scampered up like a little monkey, and he covered himself with doubloons until his little peepers, he could see out through this little piece, but the rest of him was all covered with coins. But it was nice and cooling, so it was nice. Well, he waited for a while, and he waited. So there's this pirate who's in the ride, of course, and he knew that he was in trouble, so he lent him his hat. So even though he had an orange, twin had an orange shirt on, he thought, well, the hat might help to disguise it. So he's going, shiver me timbers. Nothing like a swim with the sharks to make a man feel like a pirate. Well, anyway, so he comes outside and he's about ready to leave. And then he hears a terrible noise. What is that? And he looks, and there's a turkey leg stand there. And he sees, and all the ladies are all, they have them parked around the stand, and they're taking the big turkey legs with the big bone and going, hunk, 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 hunk. He is so frightened. Oh, they're looking for me, and that's just what they do. So he had his pirate hat, and he kind of just got into the bushes, and then he climbed in and walking along and walking. He climbed up a tree, and he's looking out, and he was there all the rest of the day. And he was waiting, and then he saw in formation they were leaving, and he goes, "Oh." So he survived. So there you have it. And just make sure that when you're talking to a bunch of ladies who want the Dole Whip, don't suggest to them that invisible babies had anything to do with their happiness, because they really cherish them. I think.
The wildest ride in Disneyland I ever.
Yes.
So I'd be remiss if I did not ask you to tell stories of the video.
Yeah, they let me, actually. It's and so it was nice because in attractions you have a lot of freedom to talk with people and interact and have nice conversations too and all this. And and so it was a good response. It was always family friendly. So had good response, and so management respected. And so I call them my twin brothers, the different locations. And so there was another twin brother who worked at the Astro Orbiter where the rockets go around. And so there would be a bunch of kids in line, of course, you know, and so sometimes he'd stop and cheek out the door and say, "Hey kids, what's your favorite animal? What's your favorite food?" And they'd shout out dog, cat, peanut butter jelly sandwich, or whatever. And so he'd make up stories, hopefully with these different elements in it. So the guinea pig planet, crocodile planet, or whatever it might be. And it was interesting because management would allow him to do this because people liked it. They would be standing around listening to his stories. And there might be some stories like Monkey Planet, I think it was, it had to do with buried treasure and all this. And the kids would be in the rockets going around. And so he'd start telling this story. This is before they had the recording. Now they have a recording. But so the rockets would go around, and then he tells the story, and it's like, and as they're coming down, he says, "To be continued." And so then you pick up the story and continue from that point with the next bunch in there, and then they go up. And it was actually rather interesting because it was at this one point he had done some trained voiceover in Burbank and Hollywood, which comes in handy. About 52 characters. And it came in handy because then you have confidence, because you will get resistance from people who don't have that set of knowledge or whatever ability. But you have to be in character. You know, if you're going to start, if you're going to be in character, you have to be in it. You know, it's like impossible. And so, anyway, so somebody from the Disney character voice department up in Burbank, with the international voices, and they heard, and so they asked for a demo to manage stuff like that. So it was nice. But so the opportunity it's a perfect place for storytellers. I tell you, it's like you have all these, the rich background of all these different characters we've known since we were kids. And so I had, attorneys who would want my job. I would get to talk with them. Very, you could tell that they were well-to-do, and but it's like it's a joy when you find just a niche, and the place is meant for that. Where there's a wall around it, and just like in high school, I was in high school to tell stories and stuff on breaks and lunches. I don't know why, but just to cheer people up, And so, I'm telling too much, saying too much stuff. Anyway, I want to bore you guys with that, but in that setting, there's that wall, the berm, the mound of dirt that the train sits on. It provides a psychological barrier from the rest of the world. So it's like you're in this magic place, and then just outside, it's different. And you'll have people who are, have their hair black and tattoos, and they look very intimidating. Yet, why are they there? It's I think, because they want to keep the little kid inside them alive, you know, and so it's like they'll put on this scary outward thing, probably to protect themselves from scrutiny and that kind of stuff. You just leave them alone. That's what they want. So anyway, so
Thank you for
What a
Yeah.
career.
Sharing
Yeah.
that story, yeah. Okay, so I have a story, and are you gonna tell them? Still thinking, okay. So the story I'm gonna tell is a Jewish folk tale. Long ago, there was a young rabbi that settled into a community, and he was very eager to start teaching and make his mark in the world. But after several months, he had only been invited to talk at the local temple once, and he taught a few students, but it was apparent to him that he really was in the shadow of the old rabbi who had been there teaching for many years, and students would flock to listen to the old rabbi's lessons. And he had many followers where this rabbi really had no regular followers. And he thought the only way that he could change this situation was somehow to discredit the old rabbi in front of his students. And he thought for several days, and finally he thought he came up with a plan. What he would do is he would go to one of the old rabbi's lessons, and he would be holding a bird behind his back. And he would ask the rabbi, present the question saying, I have a bird behind my back. Is it alive or dead? And if the rabbi said it was dead, he would let the bird fly free. But if the rabbi said the bird is alive, he would break its neck with his fingers and present a dead bird. It was foolproof. No matter which way the old rabbi answered, he was going to be proven wrong. And surely this would discredit him in front of his followers. So the next day, he showed up at the morning lesson, the old rabbi. They were gathered under the shade of a tree, and the rabbi was talking, and the young rabbi came up, and he waited for just the right time. And he said, Rabbi, I have a question for you. I have a bird behind my back. Is it alive or is it dead? And the old rabbi had a serene face, but there seemed to be a touch of sadness in that face as he said, the answer, my friend, is entirely up to you. And the young rabbi was dumbfounded by that answer. And finally, he just let the bird free and sat down to listen to this.
Oh, my goodness.
From one of my greatest sources of the folk tales, Dan Kedding's collection of elder tales. Oh yeah, I've a lot of the stories you've heard me tell come from this book. Stories of wisdom and courage from around the world. There's another one he did that also is very good, and it's called Tales of Hope and Wisdom, and they're folk tales from Eastern Europe specifically that have wisdom and hope, whereas this is from all around. And I like the style of storytelling that Dan Kedding uses. Well, he loves telling folk tales, and I love folk tales. And he plays a guitar, and I don't have that skill, but I do have a number of my stories that I tell are his. And one was not a folk tale. I thought it was. I bought one of his CDs, and I've told this
tale before us called One Tear. And it sounded like a folktale to me. So Chris and I were at the Mariposa Storytelling Festival a number of years ago, and I went up after, and he was one of the storytellers there, and I went up after a session and I said, there's this great story of yours. It's a great folktale on the CD called One Tear, and I'd like to have permission to tell it. And he laughed and he said, it's not a folktale, it's an original story written by me.
Whoa.
And he said, yes, you have permission to tell it. And there was another one that I heard at the Ojai Storytelling Festival on Ghost Story Night, a portrait for the Czar, which I've told a number of times. And it's funny how we go to storytelling festivals a lot. And when I hear a story that resonates with me, I think, I want to remember that one. That's a great story. But as soon as I hear the next story, I forget the details of the story before. It's hard to keep it going. But that night, that ghost story night, we went back to the motel because it was a 3-day festival. And the story was still in my head, even though I had heard other stories after it. And I jotted down some notes, and that was Thursday night. And then the following Tuesday, well, that weekend, on Sunday when we went home, I went on the internet and I couldn't find any sources for this story. And so on Tuesday, it happened to be the second Tuesday of the month, and we met here and I told the story just from the memory of hearing it once. And Chris told me afterward I got the ending, and she was right. I found out later. But then that was in the spring, and then that next fall, I wanted to tell it for Celebration. So I wrote him asking for permission, and he wrote back and said he has not been able to find any other source for that story. He heard it from his Croatian grandfather, and he would be delighted if I told the story to keep it alive. So he gave me permission to tell that story. You're gonna do it?
I too heard a story like that. I went to.
But you have to come up.
Oh. I went to a storytelling by Katie Rydell at one of the Folk Music Center storytelling. And the story went in my ears and into my heart and out my mouth as soon as anybody would stop and listen. So I told it to my grandson. We were on a long journey this weekend in the car, and it's still here. So I'll share it.
Loud.
Okay. Find a voice. Once there was a man who was so old that nobody knew any longer how old he was. And he was so wise that they didn't even call him by his name anymore. They called him the wise man. And he lived in a place that was outside of the town of here. And by himself, and he was quite happy in his retirement, enjoying himself. In the town nearby, there was a merchant, and he was leaving town. He was going to go to the town of there. And he got halfway to the town of there. And suddenly there was a giant in the middle of the road who looked and was dressed just like a merchant. And he looked at the giant looked at him and said, no one goes from here to there without a fight. Choose your weapon, dark or light. I'll more than match you, right, wrong or right. And the merchant said, I just remembered something that happened here. I better talk to you later. And it goes straight to the king. And he says, King, I cannot run a business like this. I need to be able to go from here to there without fighting. And I really don't. And the king said, what shall I do? And his wife said, dear, And he said, not now, dear, I gotta consult my wise men. And so all the women chuckled. He went to his wise men, and they all advised him to send the royal wrestler, because, you know, of course, the wrestler could convince anybody. So he did. The wrestler walked out to meet the giant. And the giant said to him, "Halt, no one goes from here to there without a fight. You choose your weapon, dark or light. I'll more than match you, wrong or right." And the wrestler said, "I choose wrestling." And the giant said, "Oh, okay." And he stomped on the ground, and the wrestler flew up and landed on the screen and said, "I just remembered I had an appointment back in here. I'm going to talk to you later." And he headed back to the king. "King, this is not my fight. Not me." And the king said, "Oh, dear." And she said, "Honey, not now, dear. I gotta go." And his advisors advised him to get the royal swordsman. So the royal swordsman came, whole thing. He went out and met the giant. The giant said, "Halt, no one goes from here to there without a fight. Choose your weapon, dark or light. I'll more than match you, wrong." And the swordsman and the giant lifts his sword that's as big as the swordsman. And the swordsman clothes just zipped, just pieces of clothes. He had to hold them together and get back. Okay. Meets with the king, who says, what shall I do? And his wife says, "Oh dear, please, not now. This is awful. We can't go from here to here. This is going to ruin all our trade out, everything." And he goes to consult his wise men, and they say, "Okay, you've got to get the royal thing fight." And so he got on his horse. He rode out to meet the giant, who was dressed exactly like the flamethrower too. And he said, "Halt. No one goes from here to there without a fight. Choose your weapon, dark or light. I'll more than match you, wrong or right." And sure enough, you know what happened. He said, "I choose fire." And before you knew it, his clothes were in ashes, and he took his horse and went back. Dear, what about the wise one? Why didn't you get the wise one? He said, "That's a good idea. I'm so And they did. They sent for the wise man, who was ready to eat his dinner and did not want to miss his dinner. But, you know, duty calls. And so he grabbed a few rolls, tucked them in his pocket. So we had a chance he could have something to eat. And they had a cart and a horse waiting for him because he no longer rode a horse. He preferred them. And when he got out there to meet the giant, of course, said, "Halt! You can help me if you want. No one goes from here to there without a fight. Choose your weapon, dark or light. I'll more than match you, wrong or right." And the old one said, "Well, let me think about it." He said, "You know, let me tell you about myself. I'm old. I'm so old that nobody knows how old I am. And I'm so wise. Other people say that. I don't call myself wise, but other people say that. And they just call me the wise one. And I'd like you to tell me about yourself. And the giant said, my father was the west wind, and my mother was a mirror. And anything you give to me, I will give back to you tenfold. And the wise man thought that was the case. And he said, just as he started to say something, his stomach started. And he reached in his pocket, pulled out his roll, and he offered it to the giant. Could you have some? And I'll eat it too. And he says, kindness is your weapon, is it? I'll show you kindness. And he licked his fingers, and there was a table spread. And there was everything you could imagine.
Oh.
And there was a chair. He said, here, eat. And the wise man was glad to take advantage of that situation. And he ate his fill. And then he said, you know, I was about to go to there, the town fair. And I wondered if you'd like a ride, go with me. He said, kindness again? He said, I'll show you. And the giant picked up the cart and the horse and the old one in his other arm. And in 5 or 6, maybe 10 strides, he was at it. And he gently put down the cart and the horse and the old. And he said, I hope that you learned your lesson. The old one said, indeed, I have. And from that moment on, no one ever had to walk or ride anything any further than halfway to there, because all they had to do was offer the giant a ride, and they were there before. This story was in the Quaker, and the Quakers were telling me all over. They didn't know who wrote it. It was written and it was just anonymous. And finally, somebody found out it was Aaron Shepard. Do you know him? Wow. And the reason he didn't put his name on it, he has a whole website of stories, wonderful readers theater. I used it with my kids when I worked. And he said, I couldn't put my name on it because it came to me whole in a dream. And I just had to put it like it was and share it. So there you have it.
What was the name of that story?
What?
What was the name of the story?
More than a match.
Thank you, Chris. That was a great story. Okay, so I think we've heard all the stories for the night. I think at this point, I'm going to stop the recording and then want to have sort of a little business meeting and announcements, but let me stop the recording.